The first bullet tore through Callissa Monroe's shoulder before the crack of the rifle even registered. The second followed a heartbeat later, shredding the strap of her yellow delivery backpack and burying itself in her side. The third shattered her rib, the fourth ripped through her thigh. The fifth grazed her temple, sending her vision into a white-hot kaleidoscope of agony and asphalt. But none of that mattered. All that mattered was the 10-year-old girl pressed beneath her athletic frame, trembling but breathing, alive because Callissa had thrown herself between Yunei and a hail of lead. The peaceful school sidewalk had transformed into a tactical kill zone in less than 20 seconds. Black smoke from a detonated vehicle hissed across the pavement, while shattered glass from nearby shopfronts glittered like deadly diamonds in the afternoon sun. Masked men in tactical gear moved with military precision, their automatic weapons trained on anything that moved. Park Dong-hyeon's security detail was scrambling, caught completely off guard by the brutality of the street ambush. Callissa had seen the danger 60 seconds before it arrived. She'd been locking her bike, mid-shift, when something in her gut twisted with a recognition she hadn't felt in years. A familiar dread from a past, spent navigating the violent edges of the city. The black sedan idling too long at the corner, the construction workers who hadn't touched a tool all morning, the calculated silence that usually preceded a storm. See the danger before it sees you, her father's voice echoed in her fading consciousness. It's the only way people like us survive. She had survived the streets. She had survived a life of being invisible, a black delivery girl weaving through a world that looked through her rather than at her. But survival had taught her to recognize the signature of violence, and when the first window exploded inward, her body had moved on pure, sacrificial instinct. Yunei was sobbing against her chest, her pink school cardigan soaked in Callissa's blood. The pain was distant now, replaced by the strange, floating sensation of shock and organ damage. Across the smoke-filled chaos, Park Dong-hyeon, the winter dragon, fought like a demon unleashed. He'd only seen Callissa once before, a week ago, when she dropped off a package and he hadn't even looked at her face. Now, his dark, calculating eyes found her across the asphalt, and something in them cracked. He realized in a moment of shattering clarity that his daughter's life had been bought by the blood of a stranger he deemed invisible. He moved with terrifying speed, clearing the remaining attackers before sliding across the blood-slicked pavement to her side. No, stay with me, his voice broke, a sound the head of the city's most lethal syndicate had likely never made. His hands were on her face, frantic, trying to find where the warm rivulets of blood were coming from. Stay awake, Callissa, stay awake. He had remembered her name. Through the darkness closing in, Callissa felt a strange bloom of warmth that had nothing to do with the 5 bullets in her body. Hello, family. Before we continue, I would like to know where you are watching from. Drop it in the comments and also subscribe to this channel. Now let's go back into the story. The antiseptic smell of Seoul National University Hospital was thick enough to taste, a sharp contrast to the metallic scent of blood that still clung to Park Dong-hyeon's skin. He stood in the sterile light of the intensive care unit, his ruined silk shirt discarded for a fresh black suit that felt like a burial shroud. On the other side of the reinforced glass, Callissa Monroe lay tethered to the world by a spiderweb of plastic tubing and the rhythmic, haunting hiss of a ventilator. She looked fragile, her deep brown skin turned ashen, yet the heart monitor sang a steady, stubborn tune of survival. She's a witness now, Jun, Dong-hyeon said, his voice a low, dangerous vibration that made the surrounding air feel heavy. The moment she is vulnerable, they will come for her to tie up the loose ends. Jun, his right-hand man, shifted uncomfortably in the shadows of the hallway. We can provide security, sir. Guards at every exit. We can turn this hospital into a fortress. It isn't enough, Dong-hyeon countered, his eyes fixed on the bandages wrapping Callissa's head, 5 bullets meant for his 10-year-old daughter. In our world, guards can be bought, security can be bypassed, but family is an absolute. It is the only thing that creates a blood debt they cannot ignore. He turned to the waiting lawyer, a man whose disheveled appearance betrayed the 4:30 a.m. summons. The emergency marriage documents, are they ready? The lawyer, Attorney Lee, swallowed hard, his hands trembling as he adjusted his glasses. Sir, under the emergency legal provisions for high-risk witnesses, We can perform the ceremony. Given the imminent threat to her life and her lack of local kin, your status as her legal protector allows for a binding union. But she is unconscious, Mr. Park. That is what power is for, Lee. To do what others say cannot be done, Dong Hyun replied, his tone as cold and final as a closing casket. They entered the room with the quiet precision of a tactical team. The only guests were the humming machines and a judge who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else on Earth. Dong Hyun stepped to the side of the bed and took Callus's left hand. Her fingers were cool, her palm calloused from the handlebars of a delivery bike and the grit of a life spent working for every cent, hands that had caught his daughter when the world exploded. He slid a platinum band onto her finger, a simple, heavy thing that felt like a shackle and a shield all at once. The judge began the recitation, his voice a frantic whisper against the backdrop of the city's early morning ambulance sirens. When the moment came for Callus's response, Dong Hyun did not hesitate. He took her limp thumb, pressed it against a dark ink pad, and then firmly onto the signature line of the marriage certificate. By the power of the Republic of Korea, I pronounce you husband and wife, the judge stammered. Dong Hyun leaned down, his face inches from hers. He didn't kiss her lips. He pressed a solemn, lingering vow against her forehead. You're safe now, he whispered, the words intended only for her subconscious. I've given you my name, my resources, and my war. No one touches a park and lives. He stood up, his height filling the small room with a sudden, suffocating authority. Jun, file the papers with the ministry immediately. Triple the guards. If a single person without park clearance enters this floor, kill them. He looked back at the woman who had traded her blood for his daughter's life. She was no longer a stranger, no longer the help, and no longer invisible. She was the new queen of the Kang Syndicate, and the world was about to find out exactly how much that cost. The darkness didn't lift all at once. It peeled away in agonizing layers of white-hot pain and the rhythmic, clinical hiss of a ventilator. When Callissa finally forced her eyes open, the world was a blur of cream-colored silk and polished mahogany. This wasn't the sterile, cramped ward of a public hospital. She was lying in a bed that felt like a cloud, draped in linens that cost more than her delivery bike, but the heavy weight in her chest and the fire in her thigh reminded her of the sidewalk, the shattered glass, and the 5 bullets that had hunted her down. Her hand twitched, hitting something cold and metallic. She looked down, her vision clearing just enough to see a heavy platinum band encircling her ring finger. Panic, sharp and cold, surged through her, spiking her heart rate until the monitors beside her began to wail in protest. Easy, Zara, a voice rumbled from the shadows. You're safe. Park Dong-hyun stepped into the light. He had discarded the blood-soaked suit from the street, appearing now in a crisp charcoal blazer that made him look less like a demon and more like the king of a corporate empire. Where is the girl? Where is Yunei? Callus's voice was a shredded whisper, her throat feeling as though she had swallowed glass. She is safe. Because of you, he said, his dark eyes tracking the frantic movement of her pupils. He leaned forward, his presence filling the room until the air felt thin. But you need to look at your hand, Callissa, and you need to listen. What is this? She rasped, lifting her hand with trembling effort to show him the ring. What did you do while I was out? I made you a park, he said, his voice flat and devoid of apology. We were married 3 days ago. It was the only way to move you into this wing, the only way to grant you the full protection of my name. The outrage hit her before the pain could. You married me, without my consent. You took my life while I was unconscious. She tried to sit up, her muscles screaming in rebellion as her survival instincts, forged in the violent neighborhoods of her past, flared into a desperate, trapped heat. I am not your property. I am a delivery girl from the streets, not a pawn for your mafia games. In my world, there is no such thing as a delivery girl anymore, Dong-hyun countered, his jaw set in a line of iron. There are only family members and targets. By saving my daughter, you became a target to whoever ordered that hit. You are the only person who saw their faces. Without this ring, you are a witness to be disposed of. With it, you are an empress. I don't want to be an empress, she spat, though the effort made her dizzy. I want my life back. Your life ended the moment you took those bullets, he said, stepping closer until he was looming over the bed. He reached out, his fingers stopping just short of her face. "And if you think I'm being dramatic, look at the monitor on the wall." He gestured to a small security screen. In the hallway, 3 men dressed as orderlies were moving with a precision that had nothing to do with medicine. They were checking doors, their hands hidden in the pockets of their white coats where the unmistakable silhouettes of silenced pistols rested. "They've been trying to find this suite for 24 hours, Dong Hyun whispered, his eyes never leaving the screen. "They don't care about your pride, Kalisa. They only care that you're breathing. My men are waiting at the end of that hall to end them, but they are only there because you are Mrs. Park." Kalisa watched the screen, her breath hitching as the reality of her gilded cage settled in. The silk sheets no longer felt like a luxury, they felt like a shroud. She looked at the man who had bought her life with a ring and realized she had traded the dangers of the street for the lethal complexities of a palace. "So," she whispered, her gaze meeting his with a defiance that hadn't quite died, "what happens when the orderlies are gone?" "Then," he said, a ghost of a predatory smile touching his lips, "we find out who sent them." The heavy silence of the luxury suite was broken by the soft click of the door and a small, hesitant shadow that darted across the mahogany floor. Yunei didn't wait for permission. She scrambled onto the edge of the cloud-like bed, her small hands clutching the hem of Kalisa's silk covers as if they were a lifeline. The 10-year-old was still wearing her pink school cardigan, now clean of the blood, but wrinkled from days of refusing to leave the hospital wing. "Daddy said I had to go home to sleep," Yunei whispered, her large, glassy eyes fixed on Kalisa's bandaged face with a desperate kind of hope. "But if I go, you might disappear again, like my real mom." Kalisa felt a sharp pang in her chest that had nothing to do with the bullet wounds. She looked at the child she had bled for, the stake in a game she hadn't known she was playing, and saw the same raw vulnerability she used to see in her own reflection back in the neighborhoods where children learned to duck before they learned to read. "I'm not going anywhere, kid," Kalisa rasped, her voice still sounding like crushed velvet. She reached out, her fingers brushing the girl's hair with a tenderness that surprised them both. "But if you're going to stay here, you need to learn how to keep those eyes open. No more crying when the world gets loud. You understand?" Yunei nodded solemnly, wiping a stray tear with her sleeve. "Stronger than Daddy." "Different kind of strong," Kalisa corrected, her mind flashing back to the black sedan she had spotted 60 seconds before the glass shattered. She pointed toward the ornate, heavy curtains that masked the floor-to-ceiling windows. "Tell me, Yunei, without looking, how many men are standing outside that door right now?" The girl blinked, confused. "I don't know, 3. "Listen to the floorboards. Listen to the way the air changes when a door opens at the end of the hall," Kalisa said, her tone shifting into the rhythmic, instructional style of a survivor. "There are 4. One has a heavier step, that's Junhee's the anchor. The others are shadows. You never watch the person in front of you, you watch the space they're trying to hide." For the next hour, the gilded cage transformed into a classroom of shadows. Kalisa taught the girl the signature of violence, how to spot the car that's been idling too long, the gardener who doesn't know how to hold a rake, and the absolute importance of the blind spot in a security camera's sweep. She was giving Yunei the only inheritance that mattered in their world, the ability to see danger before it saw her. Park Dong-hyun watched from the doorway, his silhouette framed by the dim hallway light. He had come to discuss security rotations, but he stayed silent, watching the black delivery girl he had claimed as his wife pass on the tactical training he hadn't realized she possessed. He saw the way his daughter's posture straightened, the way her fear began to calcify into a sharp, focused awareness. He realized then that Kalisa Monroe wasn't just a shield he had bought, she was a teacher for the war to come. As the two of them sat on the bed, the survivor and the air, the electricity in the room crackled with a new, dangerous purpose. Kalisa wasn't just protecting a child anymore, she was forging a weapon. "Again," Kalisa whispered as a soft footfall echoed in the hall. "Who is it, Yunei, and what are they carrying?" The girl went perfectly still, her eyes narrowing just like the winter dragon. "It's Jun," she said clearly, "and he's bringing your medicine, but he's walking fast, something's wrong." Kalisa's gaze met Dong-hyun across the room. The gilded cage was no longer just a prison, it was a fortress, and its newest sentry was only 10 years old. The shadows in the suite deepened as the late afternoon sun dipped behind the Seoul's skyline, casting long, jagged lines across the floor that looked like bars. Yoonhee had finally succumbed to exhaustion, curled into a small, peaceful ball at the foot of the bed. Park Dong-hyun remained by the window, his silhouette motionless against the glass, a man who looked like he had been carved from the very ice he was named for. "You have a gift, Kalisa," he said, his voice a low rumble that barely carried across the room. "The way you taught her to listen to the floorboards, that isn't something one learns from a delivery app." Kalisa leaned back against the pillows, her hand instinctively going to the heavy platinum band on her finger. "It's called living in the real world, Dong-hyun. In the neighborhoods I come from, if you don't notice the change in the air when a door opens, you don't make it to 20. She met his gaze through the dim light. "But you didn't marry me for my teaching skills. Why are you really here?" Dong-hyun stepped closer, the smell of expensive tobacco and cold rain clinging to his suit. "I told you I made you a park for your protection, and that was true. But it wasn't the whole truth." He sat in the chair beside her bed, leaning forward until the intensity of his dark eyes made her skin warm. "I've been watching you for months, Kalisa, long before the shooting." Kalisa's heart skipped, a jagged rhythm of surprise and suspicion. "Watching me? I was a ghost on a bike. I dropped off your packages and disappeared." "You were never a ghost," he countered, his voice dropping to an intimate whisper. "I watched you through the security monitors while you were dusting. I saw the way you scanned the perimeter of the mansion every time you arrived. I saw you pause at the third-floor balcony, noting the blind spot in the camera sweep that even my chief of security missed." Kalisa went still. "So you didn't just pick a random hero, you picked an investigator." "I picked a partner," he corrected, his expression softening into something raw and real for a heartbeat. "The hit on the street was too precise. Someone knew the school schedule. Someone knew exactly which guards were compromised." He reached out, his thumb tracing the back of her hand, his touch surprisingly gentle. "I've spent years looking at my world through the eyes of people I pay to tell me I'm safe. I need eyes that have seen the signature of violence without a paycheck attached." The gilded cage suddenly felt like a war room. Kalisa looked at the man who had upended her life and saw the same familiar dread she had felt in the moments before the bullets arrived. He wasn't just a monster. He was a man whose empire was rotting from the inside. "You want me to find the mole," she said, her street-smart instincts already beginning to calculate the angles. "I want you to see what I am blind to," Dong-hyun replied, his grip on her hand tightening. "I'll give you access to every camera, every financial record, every guard's file. In return, I give you the power to ensure no one ever makes you feel invisible again." Kalisa looked at the ring, then back at the winter dragon. She was trapped, yes, but for the first time in her life, she had been given a weapon instead of just a shield. "I want my sister safe first. If I do this, you move her to a secure location in the States. No more scrubbing floors to send money home." "Done," he said, the word a cold, binding contract. "We're partners now, Kalisa Monroe. Let's burn the traitors out of our home." The transition from delivery girl to syndicate strategist happened not in a boardroom, but in the dim, blue light of a dozen monitors brought into Kalisa's hospital suite. Her body still throbbed with the ghost pain of 5 bullets, but her mind was finally back in its element, scanning for the signature of violence she had been trained to recognize since her youth. Park Dong-hyun sat beside her, his presence a silent, heavy weight as they reviewed the digital fragments of her life from before the sidewalk became a war zone. "Start with my bike's dash cam," Kalisa rasped, her voice regaining its strength even as she remained tethered to the bed. "I was making a drop-off at the Southernport warehouse 2 days before the hit. Something felt off then, but I was too focused on my shift to name it." Jun pulled up the footage. The screen showed the grainy, fisheye perspective of the city streets as Kalisa wove through traffic. The camera captured the mundane, gray asphalt, yellow taxis, and the industrial silhouettes of the Kang Syndicate's shipping hubs. "Stop," Kalisa commanded, her dark eyes narrowing with a ferocity that made Dong-hyun go still. "Rewind 10 seconds. Watch the man in the charcoal suit standing by the loading dock." The man was Sergeant Han, a high-ranking member of Dong-hyun's internal security detail, a man vetted, trusted, and supposedly beyond reproach. On the screen, he was speaking to a driver. It looked like a routine check until the moment Callisa's bike sped past. "There," Callisa whispered, pointing a trembling finger at the screen. "Look at his left hand." As the delivery bike passed, Sergeant Hand didn't just check a clipboard. He raised 3 fingers to his lapel, followed by a quick, sharp tug at his earlobe. It was a gesture that lasted less than a second, a signal so subtle it would have been dismissed by anyone who hadn't lived in a world where a hand movement could be a death sentence. "He's confirming a position," Callisa explained, her nursing training allowing her to keep her heart rate steady even as the monitors began to beep. "I saw the same gesture in a neighborhood hit back home. He wasn't talking to the driver. He was signaling a spotter in the building across the street." Dong Hyun leaned closer, his jaw tightening until the bones seemed ready to snap. He recognized the signal now, a code used by his own tactical teams, repurposed for his destruction. "Han has been with me for 10 years. He has access to my daughter's school schedule. He has access to the blind spots in the mansion." The gilded cage suddenly felt like the center of a spiderweb. Callisa looked at the man she had married out of necessity and saw the winter dragon truly emerge. The vulnerability he had shown earlier was gone, replaced by a cold, absolute fury. "You were right, Dong Hyun," she said, her gaze returning to the monitor. "You were blind to him because you saw a brother. I only saw a man who didn't want to be seen." Dong Hyun stood, his hand lingering on Callisa's arm for a moment, a gesture of genuine partnership that transcended the platinum ring on her finger. "Jun, bring Han in, quietly. I want to know who is holding the leash of a man I thought was loyal." As Jun moved to obey, Callisa felt the first real shift in her new reality. She wasn't just surviving the Mafia, she was dismantling it from within. The delivery girl was gone, and the strategist was just getting started. The transition from the hospital bed to the head of a mahogany banquet table was a blur of emerald silk and tactical briefings. Callisa Monroe stood at the top of the mansion's grand staircase, her deep brown skin glowing against the fitted green dress that masked the bandages still hugging her ribs. Her hair was styled in an elegant updo that incorporated her natural curls, and the diamond earrings Dong Hyun had gifted her caught the light like the deadly diamonds of the glass she had survived. Beside her, Park Dong Hyun looked every bit the winter dragon in a tailored black suit, his hand resting possessively on her waist as they prepared to descend into the den of his most dangerous lieutenants. "They will look for a maid," Dong Hyun whispered into her ear, his voice a low, grounding rumble. "Show them the queen I married." The dining room was a sea of cold eyes and practiced smiles. 8 couples were already seated, radiating power, and the kind of barely concealed violence Callisa had learned to recognize in the streets of her past. At the far end of the table, in a dress the color of fresh blood, sat Miss Anne, the woman who had expected to wear Callisa's ring. Her eyes locked onto Callisa with a hatred so pure it felt like a physical weight. "Everyone, I'd like to formally introduce my wife, Callisa Park," Dong Hyun announced, his voice carrying the weight of a command. "She saved my heir by taking 5 bullets meant for her. She has earned her place through blood, and I expect her to be treated with the same respect you show me." A heavy silence followed, broken only by the clinical clink of silverware. Miss Anne leaned forward, her porcelain features twisting into a mask of false sweetness. "How noble of you, Hyun Woo, but let's not pretend this is anything more than a transaction. A delivery girl finds herself in the right place at the right time, and suddenly she's playing dress-up in clothes she doesn't understand." Callisa felt the defensive pride she had carried as a worker flare into a cold, strategic heat. She didn't flinch. Instead, she leaned forward, her dark eyes pinning Miss Anne in place with the same situational awareness that had saved Yunei. "You're right, Miss Anne. I am an outsider," Callisa said, her voice calm and cutting. "Which means I see the patterns you're too blind to notice. While you were busy positioning yourself for a proposal that was never coming, I was noticing the signature of violence in your own father's territory." The table went dead silent. The men shifted, their eyes darting to Chairman Beck, Miss Anne's father, whose smile had instantly vanished. "I know how the cartels operate," Callisa continued, drawing on the tactical knowledge her father had instilled in her. I know that an inside job doesn't just happen, it's funded. I saw Sergeant Hand's signal, the same code used by the Nigerian facilitators who tried to destroy my family back home. So before you question my worthiness, ask yourself, did you see the traitor sitting right next to you, or were you too busy admiring your own reflection? Miss An's face flushed with a rage that cracked her impeccable composure. Dong Hyan's hand found calluses under the table, his fingers interlacing with hers in a gesture of absolute solidarity. He looked at her not with pity, but with a raw, terrifying pride. I think that settles the question, Dong Hyan said, his voice dropping to a lethal chill. My wife sees the board while the rest of you are still playing with toys. Now, shall we discuss the warehouse that burned in Chairman Beck's territory last night, or are we still pretending this dinner is about social graces? In that moment, the status inversion was complete. The delivery girl had vanished, replaced by a woman who understood the language of blood better than anyone in the room. The transition back into the world of asphalt and exhaust was as jarring as it was necessary. Callisa stood in the mansion's garage, staring at her old yellow insulated delivery backpack, a relic of a life that felt decades away. Her wounds were still healing, the 5 bullet scars across her body acting as a constant, pulsing reminder of the cost of her visibility. But Dong Hyan had been right. The gilded cage was a blind spot. To find Seo Yun, the maid who had fled after confirming the hit, Callisa had to become a ghost again. You go nowhere without Jun and a full team, Dong Hyan had commanded, his eyes reflecting a war between his need to protect her and his respect for her tactical mind. Callisa ignored the diamond earrings and the silk, pulling on her worn dark work pants and the red delivery shirt that now felt like a uniform for a different kind of war. The neighborhood in Busan was a maze of narrow alleys and leaning tenements, the air thick with the smell of fried street food and coal smoke. Callisa moved with the practiced ease of a woman who had spent months in invisible servitude. Her large backpack signaling to the world that she was just another cog in the city's labor machine. She spotted Seo Yun at a modest hotel front desk, the girl's eyes darting with the same familiar dread Callisa had felt on the day of the shooting. I'm not here to hurt you, Callisa whispered, leaning over the counter as she caught the girl's trembling hand. But I know they threatened your brother. I know the money came from an account linked to Chairman Beck. Seo Yun's face went ashen. You don't understand. Their reach is everywhere. You got out by becoming untouchable through marriage, but I'm already dead. Before Callisa could offer the winter dragon's protection, the hotel's glass doors exploded inward in a spray of deadly diamonds. 3 men in dark suits stormed the lobby, their automatic weapons trained on anything that moved. The ambush was too precise. The attackers hadn't been looking for the maid. They had been waiting for the delivery girl. Get down! Jun's voice crackled in Callisa's earpiece as the room transformed into a war zone. Callisa didn't freeze. She grabbed a fire extinguisher from the wall, her body moving on pure, survival-trained instinct. She sprayed a wide arc of foam to blind the lead attackers, then launched the heavy canister with the compact, athletic strength of a woman used to physical work. The impact sent the man sprawling just as Jun's team moved in to neutralize the threat with cold efficiency. The engagement lasted only 40 seconds, leaving the lobby filled with toxic clouds and the ringing silence of a tactical victory. As Jun extracted her toward the armored sedan, Callisa's mind raced through the implications. The attackers had known exactly when she would be there. They hadn't just tracked a bike, they had tracked a decision made inside the Winter Dragon's private study. They knew, Callisa rasped as she climbed into the back of the vehicle, her hands finally beginning to shake. The mole isn't just in the syndicate, Jun there inside the house. The mansion glittered with a deceptive, predatory beauty, its halls flooded with the scent of expensive lilies and the underlying ozone of hidden weapons. Callisa stood before the grand mirror, her deep brown skin radiant against a stunning red dress that mirrored the color of the blood she had shed for this family. Beneath the silk, the 5 bullet scars pulsed with a dull ache, a reminder that her status as the Winter Dragon's wife was bought with the ultimate sacrifice. Park Dong-hyan entered the room, his eyes dark and intense as he adjusted his black suit, looking every bit the lethal monarch of Seoul's underworld. Tonight is a trap, Callisa, he whispered, his hands sliding possessively around her waist. They think we are distracted by personal happiness, but we are hunting them in the light. They descended the stairs as a united front, greeting the Council of Wolves with practiced grace. Chairman Beck's smile was oily, and Miss Anne's eyes were narrowed with a venomous hatred that promised murder. Every toast felt like a challenge. Every laugh was a mask for the violence brewing in the shadows. At exactly 9 o'clock, Dong Hyun raised his glass, his voice turning to steel as he addressed the room. I have honored my debt to the woman who saved my heir, he announced, his eyes locking onto Chairman Beck. But tonight is about purging the rot that tried to destroy my home. Before the traitors could react, the air was shattered by the sound of breaching charges at the perimeter. The ballroom erupted into chaos as Chairman Beck's hidden assault teams revealed themselves. But Kalisa didn't freeze. On Dong Hyun's signal, she grabbed Yunei, moving with the military-grade situational awareness she had honed on the streets. As gunfire shredded the expensive tapestries, Kalisa became the shield once more, leading the child and the elderly Mrs. Choi through a secret passage toward the armored safe room. In the ballroom, Dong Hyun fought like a demon unleashed, his loyalists springing the countertrap he and Kalisa had meticulously planned. He moved with terrifying speed, clearing the traitors with cold, surgical efficiency. The dragon's revenge was absolute. When the smoke finally cleared across the blood-slicked marble, Chairman Beck lay dead, and Miss Anne was dragged away in custody, her porcelain mask finally shattered by the weight of her own betrayal. 3 hours later, Dong Hyun stood in the foyer, his suit ruined and his hands shaking as he saw Kalisa and Yunei emerge from the safe room. He caught them in his arms, his expression transforming into something human, something that belonged to a father and a husband rather than a crime lord. In the wreckage of their home, Kalisa realized the gilded cage had dissolved. They weren't just partners in an investigation anymore. They were a family forged in sacrifice and blood, ready to build a future on the ashes of the syndicate. The aftermath of the syndicate purge left the Park mansion in a clinical, eerie silence, as if the very architecture was exhaling after months of violence. The Winter Dragon had systematically dismantled the remnants of Chairman Beck's influence, ensuring that no shadow remained to threaten his family. When the sun finally rose over the Seoul skyline, painting the floor-to-ceiling windows in shades of bruised purple and gold, Kalisa Monroe stood on the balcony, her athletic frame relaxed for the first time since the first bullet tore through her life. The 5 scars across her body remained, permanent maps of her sacrifice, but the fire of the street had finally cooled into a steady, glowing peace. Park Dong-hyun approached her with a quiet reverence, his predatory tension replaced by a stillness she had never seen. He didn't come to her as a boss or a protector, but as a man who had finally found his anchor. He stood beside her, their shoulders nearly touching, watching the city wake up below them, the same city where Kalisa had once been a ghost on a bike, invisible and disposable. The danger is gone, Kalisa, he said, his voice a low rumble that vibrated with absolute certainty. But I realize that protecting you within these walls isn't enough. You were a warrior for my daughter because the world failed to protect you. He led her back into the study, where a single velvet-covered plaque sat on his mahogany desk. I've spent my life building empires of fear, he admitted, his dark eyes locking onto hers. But you taught me that the only empire worth keeping is one built on the honor of those who survive. He pulled back the cloth to reveal the name, the Monroe Legacy Foundation. He explained that the foundation, backed by a $50 million endowment, was designed to provide tactical training, legal protection, and educational resources for vulnerable women in neighborhoods like the one she had fled. It was a bridge for those who were currently invisible, ensuring they had the tools to see danger before it saw them. Kalisa felt a surge of emotion that eclipsed the defensive pride she had once used as a shield. This wasn't a gift of guilt or a transaction of debt. It was an investment in the version of herself that the world had tried to break. She looked at the platinum ring on her finger, a band that had started as a gilded cage and had transformed into a symbol of a partnership forged in blood and truth. You don't have to be a shield anymore, Kalisa, Dong-hyun whispered, his hand covering hers. You've finished your shift, you're home. Yunei darted into the room, no longer wearing the wrinkled school cardigan of her trauma, but a bright smile that matched the morning light. She threw her arms around Callissa, clutching her not out of terror, but out of the simple, profound love of a daughter for a mother. In that moment, the status inversion was complete. The black delivery girl who had taken 5 bullets for a stranger had finally found a world that saw her, loved her, and gave her a home that didn't require her to bleed to keep it.